The ancient territory of Mesopotamia is considered one of the greatest cradles of civilization. Mesopotamia, meaning the land between the two rivers, was a collection of cultures that arose on the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers of modern Iraq. Their advancements in agriculture, science, astronomy, writing, and politics have often astonished scholars, for they seemingly made these advancements overnight. But according to the ancient Sumerians, the oldest people to arise in this part of the world, their advances were pushed forth by a group of mysterious gods known as the Anunnaki, and later the Anunnaki. Who were the Anunnaki, and where did they come from? Archaeologists have been fascinated by the sites they've unearthed around modern-day Iraq over the past 2 centuries. Enormous structures, precious artifacts, and statues make up the bulk of the finds, but what some consider to be the most fascinating are the thousands of clay-baked tablets that tell the history of the area. The earliest tablets with written inscriptions represent the work of administrators, perhaps of large temple institutions, regarding the allocation of ratios or the movement and storage of goods. Yet others speak of and depict the ancient gods known as the Anunnaki. These godlike beings have been mentioned in the legends of folklore of the Sumerians, Akkadians, Assyrians, and Babylonians. The word Anunnaki instead of Anunnaki had become common use by the later Akkadian period. According to the ancient legends recorded on many clay-baked tablets or cuneiform texts, the Anunnaki are the highest-ranking deities in a pantheon of various other gods. In the early writing of Sumer, the Anunnaki descended from the great deity An and his wife Ki, who are respectively the rulers of heaven and earth. The primary function of these Anunnaki deities was to decree the fate of humanity, as well as the 2 previously mentioned deities, Enlil, Enki, Ninhursag, Uta, Inanna, and Nanna, were all considered high-ranking nobles of the Anunnaki. While scholars have suggested the legends of the Anunnaki are nothing more than theomancy, it is possible that the tales of these gods are based in reality. The translation taken from the numerous cuneiform texts found throughout Mesopotamia have led to some scholars to believe that the Anunnaki may have been an advanced race of humanoids. However, ancient astronaut theorists believe that the Anunnaki's origin goes far beyond our world to another planet in our solar system. This planet is often referred to as Nibiru and is considered by some to be a lost 12th planet in our solar system. But is there any evidence to point toward this? Can some of the Sumerian tablets shed insight onto the origins of the Anunnaki? The creation of a hybrid species? In one specific tablet recovered from the Sumerian city of Uruk, we received a creation story, fairly similar to that of the biblical text. A few of the Anunnaki members, Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag, are said to be responsible for the creation of humans, whom the texts refer to as the black-headed ones. This name likely refers to humans that lived in Mesopotamia, such as the Sumerians and later the Babylonians. The text goes on to say that when Enlil, the creator of heaven and earth, wished to populate the earth with living beings, thus he employed the help of his brother Enki. Enki was known as the god of wisdom and knowledge, and he worked to create man in the image of the Anunnaki. So Enki, along with the help of the goddess Ninhursag, molded humans from clay, and the blood of Enlil gave them life and intellect. Various scholars and researchers over the years have tried their best to interpret this meaning behind these texts. Some suggest that this was simply the ancient Mesopotamians' way of explaining, in their own words, how humans came to be. However, others believe there is much more to the story. Some scholars believe this is actually hinting at some form of ancient genetic manipulation, a creation of hybrid species of humans that could lead back to what the biblical texts mean when they speak of the Nephilim. But why would the Anunnaki want to create a slave race of genetically modified humans? Well, according to alternative scholars, there is some reasoning behind this. It is said that the Anunnaki's home planet had begun to experience problems due to a collapse in their atmosphere. they needed to find a rich source of gold to use in a technological device that would help save their planet. So the Anunnaki had come to Earth to mine this precious mineral, hoping that it would be able to save their home. Upon arrival, they had first employed the help of a lower race of gods, but after 3,600 years, they rebelled against the Anunnaki. Following this, it seems Enlil had many of the gods killed off, and in their place, Enki was to make a race of slaves. This then leads us to the Sumerian creation story. However, some scholars believe there's more to it than what's been previously translated. It's thought that Enlil killed off a large portion of the previously lower-ranking gods and forced Enki to splice his own DNA with their former workers, bringing about the hybrid slave race of humanoids. But after 1,200 years, even the slave race began to protest against the horrid working conditions. According to texts, this began to greatly irritate Enlil so much so that he placed a drought upon them to reduce their population. Another 1,200 years passed. By this point, the slave race had populated so much that Enlil decided to starve the workers to reduce the population once more. However, his brother Enki, who has grown fond of the human slaves due to his hand in their creation, foiled the plan and supplied fish for the humans to eat. This infuriated Enlil once he found out, and one translation of a text reads as follows: Enlil is furious with Enki for breaking ranks with the rest of the gods and going against a plan that all had agreed to. Determined to wipe out mankind, Enlil decides on two things. Enki will create a flood to wipe them out, and he will be forced to swear on oath not to interfere with the destruction. Enki first refuses to create the flood, claiming that the humans are his people and he doesn't want to use his power against them. However, after a council with other gods, Enki is forced to swear on oath that he will permit the flood. The story of Enki, Enlil, and the flood. The story of a global catastrophe in the form of a flood that destroyed large parts of the world can be witnessed in just about every culture, from Indian mythology to Semitic-speaking nations, Native American folklore, and even Irish legends. All speak of a great flood that once destroyed our ancient world. One of the oldest stories surrounding this great flood comes to us from Mesopotamia, where we hear of the flood brought on by Enlil to destroy Enki's race of humans. According to legend, sourced from various cylindrical seals found at sites across Mesopotamia, the Sumerians speak of major cities and a long list of kings that existed before the Anunnaki overlords brought forth a major flood. Each individual city was ruled over by one of the Anunnaki nobles, and they lived at the major temple of that city. However, one of these cities had a human in charge, an elder known as Atrahasis. He lived in the ancient antediluvian city of Shuruppak. He was a great friend with Enki, and due to the nature of their relationship, Atrahasis was the only person whom Enki forewarned about the flood. Enki had again broken the oath he held with his brother Enlil and knew that the Anunnaki Council could banish him for such an act, but Enki couldn't help but strive to save a few members of his great race. After Enki had issued the warning to Atrahasis, he also instructed him on how to survive the flood by building a boat that was capable of not only sustaining him and his followers, but also a large number of animals. Thus, Atrahasis gathered the elders of Shuruppak and made up an excuse to leave town. He said that Enki and the Enlil were angry with each other and that Enki had commanded him to go down to the water's edge, which he does. There he builds his boat and fills it with every type of animal. Once complete, Atrahasis seals up the door of the boat, and almost immediately Enki sends forth the great flood. One text refers to the moments following the flood as follows: Like a wild ass screaming, the winds howled. The darkness was total, there was no sun. As for Nintu, the great mistress, her lips became encrusted with rime. The great gods the Anunnu stayed parched and famished. The goddess watched and wept. The Exile of the Annunaki. Following this flood, the major strongholds of the Anunnaki were also destroyed throughout Mesopotamia and beyond. Unaware of the sheer destruction that followed, many of the Anunnaki complained bitterly to Enlil about this decision-making abilities, and this greatly fractured the power of the gods. However, Enlil stood by his choice, claiming that he had accumulated enough gold long ago and there was no longer a need for human slaves. While many gods wept as they saw the destruction of this thriving planet, they stood by Enlil, for it was he who had planned to save their home planet. The flood waters eventually subsided after 7 days and nights of rain, and Atrahasis disembarks the boat to offer a sacrifice. Because of the incense and smoke released by the sacrifice, Enlil was able to spot the boat and was furious. He knew that only Enki could have been clever enough to come up with this new trick. Enki admits that he warned Atrahasis in defiance of Enlil's orders, stating, "I made sure life was preserved." This was the last straw for Enlil, and he decided that Enki should stay here on Earth since he cared too much for the humans. A feud erupted between the Anunnaki gods following these tense times. While many of the Anunnaki left under the command of Enlil, they vowed to one day return and reclaim their place as the overseers of humanity. Enki decided to stay on Earth and help the humans repopulate the planet. It's even been suggested that Enki may have been the Egyptian deity Thoth, who brought civilization to ancient Egypt following a disastrous flood. Eventually, Enki had a son with a mortal woman, bringing about the birth of his son, the deity Marduk. Marduk would eventually go to establish the ancient city of Babylon and become the ruler of a vast sway of territory in Mesopotamia. Watch our detailed video on Enki and the forbidden story of the Great Flood.